And Dr. Grinberg?
Hello, I'm from Israel. My name is Dr. Moran Grinberg, and I am the CEO of Medikana Inc., which is a cannabis-based data acquisition platform that actually Medikana was established to solve two problems. First is bridging the gap between the traditional cannabis industry and the pharmaceutical industry. And we are aiming to create a whole person therapy through a Medikana platform, and I will elaborate it on this topic much later.
Okay, thank you very much for that intro, guys. So let's get right into the meat of the topic. So before we get into how we're going to bridge this knowledge gap, explain to us a bit, Stephen, maybe you can start here. Why do you, obviously, when it comes to medical cannabis, there has to be prescription. Why, what kind of data is critical when it comes to this kind of thing?
Well, I think I'm not a prescriber, and perhaps the other doctors on the panel are probably more attuned to that. I think why it's gone down the prescription route in certainly European markets is this is or has been outside of Western medicine's education system for some time, and for doctors or for even governments to allow cannabis access into medical programs, it needs a certain level of regulation, and it needs a certain supply chain that is monitored and controlled. I also think as doctors and medical professionals who are looking after patients, they are aware of the full circle of the patient's needs. I don't think there would be any circumstance where doctors would not be actively involved in the prescription process. I think we're seeing in some markets telemedicines quickly speed up the process, but doctors would need the full overview of the patient's needs and requirements and progress under their supervision. I don't think we'll ever see a perspective where prescriptions are not part of the medical cannabis industry.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Dr. Bronstein, let's get also a doctor's opinion on this.
It's almost like that was the way that the government first allowed regulation of cannabis, was by putting it onto the medical profession. And I think that was a good idea, because we're going to think about it with safety and efficacy and compliance in mind as well. I wonder if maybe alcohol and nicotine and cocaine and heroin were put into the doctor's hands to be regulated and roll out. We might be in a better position there as well.
Mm-hmm. And let's go back to you, Stephen, because maybe you could help us a bit more when it comes to data specifically. You mentioned like a lack of education in this area, particularly with doctors. Have you noted any international effort when it comes to the sharing of data?
I think it's still relatively new. I think you've got the traditional channels of education and doctor education being a little reluctant to accept and acknowledge cannabis based on their perceived lack of data around the plant, and not wanting to go off of efficacy data. So what you're seeing is a lot of private or non-profit enterprises emerge who have led the charge on doctor education around the world. Now, is there much international partnerships on this? Well, I believe so. I think we're living in a small industry or a small bubble when it comes to cannabis, and thought leaders are scattered around the world. You know, we've from Dr. Bronxy and Dr. Moran. We've individuals who have built up their knowledge base through travels from Australia to Israel to North America, and that knowledge sharing does exist within a very close community, I would say. I think we're still in a very early stage of cannabis where not only the knowledge can be shared somewhat easily, but individuals can get access to each other in a much more accessible way, which is why events like these are still critical for helping us within the industry connect, but also those who are looking inwards in the industry, looking in terms of I may be a doctor, where do I get education? Well, if you look online, there's a number of portals from the UK, the Academy of Medical Cannabis, right through to private platforms across North America and in Canada and in Israel. I think doctors are, especially those who want to be educated, can find education. I think there is sufficient amount of education out there. I don't buy into the fact that there isn't enough education or opportunities to be educated by doctors. I think it is a simple excuse as to why things have been delayed or why things have been slower than they should have been.
It's a very simple excuse. Unfortunately, I think there's also a hesitancy from physicians to seek out these educational routes because they're non-traditional, right? It's not Johns Hopkins or NYU offering courses in cannabis education. So unfortunately, they deem them as less than optimal, right? And that's where it gets back to collecting the data. As we can further collect the data on cannabis and show the doctors evidence, then they'll be more apt to go for the education. But again, how do we collect the data when the doctors involved aren't interested in collecting the data, right? It's usually a privatization move. Yes, Steve, I'm sorry.
And
we need to get fancier certificates, to attract more doctors into these education platforms. I think is probably how we should be looking at it, because it's 100%, Mark. Like, we're not going to have the third level, or we're not going to have the likes of Johns Hopkins bring in proper cannabis seminars anytime soon.
And I want to bring in Dr. Grinberg
Which is really
conversation. I want to bring Dr. Grinberg in the conversation. Stephen was mentioning how the private sector has kind of
I'm just smiling because you gave me the best intro for my platform. And the biggest problem, I come from the pharmaceutical industry, you guys. I'm not a cannabis smoker. I never dealt with cannabis, and I was in love with cannabis, but I was more in love with the patient and the patient need. And what most of the problem in the cannabis industry, the traditional, is I call it the 3C model, that you need consistent in the product, you need certified product, as Stefan mentioned, and you need a consistent formulation. Now, everything should be solved through a database platform. Now, the database platform will actually do one thing. We don't need to educate nobody. We don't need to educate the doctors. We don't need to educate the patient. All the answers are in the patient files and their body and their feeling. And what Medikana should do is actually translate all aspects, starting from blood sample, MRI, even the mental state, because we know this is the uniqueness of the cannabis. And also, I'm not talking also about cannabis specific. We have another herbal medicine world that we are aware of it, and doctors use it, and we can get a prescription for it. So everything should be through data. Like the medical world today is going to use digital data device. So we will not have to wait for education. So this is my intro for my platform. So sorry for the overwhelming.
No, but you made a good point there, particularly how the possibility of a database could help. But the question is there enough data to put in a database to really drive the commercial interest?
Absolutely. And I think that it's a smart database that will continue to learn and optimize for the patients. And that is the
Exactly. Exactly.
To be able to, I see in the future taking the physicians like me out of the equation somewhat. And that it's not up to me to figure out the dosing, but really to be smarter than that. And to use platforms like Dr. Grinberg's to really look at that and come out with a more optimal, accurate dosing for that specific patient.
And also not only the dosing, because the platform allows the patient to update everything in his body through medical device, doesn't matter which one especially, but you as a physician will have a follow-up, like the patient will update his condition. So you have a follow-up information, not only like, okay, my patient today did a blood sample or something like this, because it's one-dimension data, and it's not enough because we are a whole person and we have our mind and body. So,
Steve, what do you think about the potential for this kind of database?
It's badly needed. I think we've got a point where patients are facing a lack of access because there's certain barriers in the way. Anything that can alleviate and eliminate to a certain extent some of the stages for patients to get access and to track the progress. I think with cannabis, we're one of the most exciting aspects that I see is that it can be personalized moving forward, and we can move towards personalized medicines. That is something amazing and unique about cannabis that has huge ramifications across not just for cannabis itself, but pharmaceutical and healthcare. The personalized medicines and our ability to track its impact on individual patients is really, really, really exciting, and it seems like it is a big challenge. I don't think we're going to solve it overnight, and the task that Dr. Grinberg has taken on here is very amenable, but it's also it's so timely in our understanding of the impact cannabis can have individually, and being able to decipher how a patient can benefit based on their conditions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so let's go full circle now, because the title of the panel is Bridging the Knowledge Gap. So I noted some areas where there might be a bit of a knowledge gap to bridge. Where do you guys think that these bridges are? Is it the ability to use this database, the ability for the patient to understand how to use their data? Any of you can answer this, really. What do you think? Maybe we can go around. You can start from Dr. Grinberg, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I dealt with this issue in my platform all the time, and when I started was like 8 months ago. So when I met patient, so also data company, all they could offer for me was a platform that are sold to hospitals. So the patient is going into a system and with a lot of windows and a lot of parameters, and it was like I couldn't understand nothing, and I was like exhausted, and my patient was cancer patient. So they need something that is much friendly, Facebook-like, and this is what I'm aiming to translate the big letter, the hard letter to the patient. So it will be much friendly, more sharing, and more data for physician. This is the way, to my understanding, we can solve it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and just so we can wrap up slowly, because our time may be running out. Can we get some closing remarks? Does anyone have anything to add? Stephen?
Yeah, I think we're in a very early stage. I think even the term data can be elusive, and what we are constantly fighting for is not only access to quality data points, but trying to agree on what data is universally important. From a commercial perspective, from an operations and logistics perspective, from a physician and healthcare perspective, we've got millions of data points that we can argue about in terms of what is important. I think we're very fortunate in this industry that we're very passionate about making this plant accessible to all and showcasing and demonstrating the good of what cannabis can bring. So I would say go far and above the norm in other industries of openly sharing data, sharing knowledge, and sharing intelligence on what is happening in sectors and regions throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bronstein, would you like to add something before we go?
Absolutely. For me, it's twofold. First will be that the companies such as mine and Dr. Grinberg's that are producing software platforms for physicians to use we're able to think ahead ethically of why we want to be collecting this data and keeping the patient's end result in mind. So that the data being collected is always being driven for patient care optimization. That's one. And then I really think, two, is that all the individual physicians utilizing these centralized platforms so that the data is able to be collected.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Grinberg, would you like to add the last comment?
Yeah, first of all, I have to thank my partner, and I'm very honored to be here. And what I want to say that this panel is actually a good example for integration of the cannabis industry and the pharmaceutical industry. And this is what I'm aiming to do, to get all sides to speak with each other. And the most important thing is the benefit for the patient.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you. Hopefully, as all of you noted, this brings some light on this area, and we'll see you next time.